Hi, this is Sean D'Souza from Psychotactics.com, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about working less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy your work and enjoy your vacation time. This is the 3-Month Vacation. I'm Sean D'Souza. Did you listen to episode number 73? There were a bunch of cliffhangers there, weren't there? It was all about our very first international workshop, which we had in Los Angeles. Well, the story continues. That was 2004, and this is February 2006. Let's jump into it, shall we? So it's February 2006. I just started a crazy venture which is called the Protégé Program. Well, it was crazy for me at least. I wrote a sales letter. I promised that I would teach 6 courses in 1 year. These courses were article writing, copywriting, information product strategy, website strategy, core marketing strategy, and public relations. Almost instantly, we sold out every single seat for the Protégé sessions. It was too good a deal to pass up. You were going to learn all the stuff that you needed as a business owner, and you were going to learn it in 1 year. Sure, it's a buffet, and we know that now, but back then, I didn't know all that stuff, and I was willing to put in all this information, and the clients were willing to take in all this information in a single year. So there we go, we're starting the Protégé sessions, and then I have this brilliant idea. I decide I'm going to have a workshop in California, but I want the Protégés to come along. Now, we've sold out everything in February, and by May, I need them to come along. And this is where all the trouble started. The workshop was not part of what I promised. It was an extra workshop of 5 days. For the first 3 days, we'd be working on website strategy. And in the following 2 days, we were going to work on closed-door Protégé sessions. The entire Protégé program was supposed to be through teleconference and online. There was no physical, let's do a workshop kind of thing. And suddenly, we had all of this scheduling, money, effort, all of these issues that cropped up. For me, it meant that I had to book a room somewhere in the US, book flights, do an entire workshop in slides in less than 8 weeks. And what's more interesting is that the workshop didn't exist. None of the notes existed, none of the information existed, no slides, and this was compounded by a few interesting facts. The Protégé year was something that was just dreamed up in a sales letter. No material existed for any of the 6 courses. Today, of course, they exist in audio and text, but back then I was creating it as the courses rolled along, as the days rolled along, as the weeks rolled along. So I had this cute little challenge of hosting live teleconferences, creating content on the fly, managing a forum with 15 Protégés, and then preparing a workshop, all simultaneously. And that was the least of my problems. I had a bit of a mutiny in my hands. I hadn't made the workshop compulsory attendance for the Protégés. You could attend if you wanted to, but I stressed that it was important. I also required each of the Protégés to cough up an additional $500 for the workshop. It was to cover the cost of the venue, the workshop, etc. This additional payment didn't go down very well. Now, everyone else who was attending the workshop was paying over $1,500. This was just $500, but it didn't go down well. What made it worse is they had to travel to Campbell, California, stay in a hotel, had all of this additional expenditure, not to mention they had to take at least a week off work, and they were not happy in the least. It almost seemed like bait and switch. But in my mind, it wasn't bait and switch at all. I really felt that those 5 days would be of immense help to the protégés. For one, there was a factor of learning in a compressed state, which is over 5 days. There was also a factor of connecting with each other because when people connect, they work better after the connection. To me, it seemed quite sensible to have a meeting like this totally out of the blue. No, I'm just kidding. But this sudden move, it kicked up a ton of dust. And then I spent a fair amount of time on the phone and on the forums and in email just sorting things out. Once things were sorted out, the real work began. We had to find a venue and get on with the job of getting the show on the road. Because Renuka's sister Audrey lived in Campbell, California, she did some scouting around for us, and we soon had our meeting room at the adorable Pruneyard Plaza, just 5 minutes away from Audrey's house. And unlike the other workshops, there was absolutely no drama this time around. All we had to do was land in San Francisco. We were picked up from the airport. We were chauffeured around from Kinko's, where we got our binders and our notes photocopied. We went to the megastore Costco. We brought all the supplies out there. We had learned a lot of lessons in 2004 when we did our first international workshop in Los Angeles. This time around, everything was reasonably settled. So we were staying at Audrey's place, and the hotel was just 5 minutes away, down the road. Now, the hotel had a little shuttle that went to the airport and came back, and they would do that complimentary. They picked us up from the house. So at 7 a.m., they would pick us up from the house, take us to the hotel. We'd set up everything, and then 5 p.m. again, they would return us back to the house. This door-to-door shuttle service was probably one of a kind. Never been done before or since. The workshop went like a dream. And yes, we made a profit on the workshop. So here's how we made a profit. Now, you know that we charged $500 per protégé. And even though there were several of them, it wasn't going to cover the airfare and the cost of the workshop. And if you're doing a workshop, you might as well make a profit. Now, that's only part of the issue. When you're doing a workshop, you want to make sure you have a full house. Having a few people in the room is nice, but having a full house really creates enormous energy in the room. So we decided to sell 15 to 18 seats. Now, we only ever do 33 to 35 attendees in a workshop. We never do more. And this is the policy that we put in place right at the start, after our crazy 150 people in the room kind of scenario. We decided we're only going to have 35 people. And though Psychotactics has grown considerably, we do not exceed this limit at any workshop. But to get back, we'd already sold those 15 seats because the protégés had decided to show up. And this created an instant urgency because 50% of the seats were already taken. Bear in mind that the workshop, this one, was selling at $2,200 per head. And so it wasn't an easy sell. Even so, the workshop was soon filled. And so we decided to have a series of workshops year after year whenever we had these protégé programs. The Protégé program itself was pretty profitable. It was generating anywhere between $100,000 to $150,000 a year. And year after year, we'd have the workshop in Campbell, California, and there were never any hitches. And it became part of the Protégé program. What was even cooler was when we started speaking at the System Seminar in Chicago, which was often held around the same time as our Protégé program. So what we'd do is we'd finish the Protégé program, then we'd head to Chicago, we'd do the speaking engagement, and then we'd head off for a month to Italy or a month to Spain. And so it worked really well for us to keep all this nice and tidy and back-to-back with each other. But then in 2008, we decided to stop the Protégé program. As I said, the Protégé program was a reasonable sum of guaranteed income year after year. But to my mind, it wasn't good for consumption. Expecting a client to learn 5 or 6 new skills in a year is somewhat like learning 5 or 6 new languages in a year. Yes, the money was good. Yes, it was a guaranteed sellout, but it didn't sit well with me. Clients loved it. They wanted to learn all these skills in a year. It was a year out of hell for them, I think. It's just too much information in too short a time and not enough implementation time. So we decided to pull the Protégé program. And clients would ask me what I was going to replace the program with. And I didn't plan to replace it with anything. As far as I was concerned, I was more interested in teaching and getting the students to learn and to implement. To me, the implementation thing is the most critical of all. To me, the Protégé program, wonderful as it was, wasn't achieving what I'd set out to do. And what I set out to do is to give skills to the client. When you do the article writing course, you should be able to write an article really well. When you do the copywriting course, sales letters shouldn't be a problem. When you do the cartooning course, you become a cartoonist, not just some pseudo-cartoonist, a real cartoonist. And the Protégé program was so packed that it wasn't achieving that goal, at least from my perspective. So we pulled the plug on it. And so the workshops went quiet for a while. Not all workshops, of course. We live in Auckland, New Zealand, and we do some workshops here, 1 or 2 a year, if at all. Plus, there were no travel costs, there were no hotel stays. You had to pay for the room, but no hotel stays. There are no fancy costs involved. And back then, at least, the room hire and the expenses were a lot lower in New Zealand than they were in the US. There's also no gratuity or tipping required in New Zealand, and all the costs are inclusive of taxes, so there are no surprises either. And then the year 2009 rolled along. It was the first year that we hadn't had a workshop, not in the US, not in New Zealand, and I hadn't really planned to do any in 2010. In fact, I was quite happy to be back in New Zealand after a 3-week vacation in Argentina and Uruguay. And we were sitting at our favorite cafe when Renuka suggested that we do a US-Canada trip. In every situation, I tend to have this crazy idea about having workshops, and Renuka says no. And in this situation, I was saying no, and Renuka wanted me to go ahead. Now, we had a lead time of just 4 weeks. In 4 weeks, we had to get 35 people to sign up at 2 venues, Vancouver and Washington, D.C. And I wasn't even keen on doing the trip, but Renuka said we had to do it. Did I say 35 people? I meant 70 people. 35 at every venue. It was the start of a mini nightmare. The nightmare wasn't so much getting the sign-ups for the workshop. The nightmare was getting the venue for the event. You see, all those years in the California sun had made us pretty complacent. Getting a venue for the workshop simply meant that we fixed a date, called the hotel, got our rooms. And bear in mind, the booking is always temporary. Even though our workshops have been solidly booked, we will still always make a temporary booking, just in case we have to cancel. This time round, there was no temporary booking. Unlike the usual California venue, we were looking for places in Washington, D.C. and Vancouver, Canada. And 2 problems cropped up instantly. One was the obvious one. We'd never had a workshop in any of these places, so we were totally unfamiliar with the territory. The second one was that we had no relationship with the hotel, and therefore we didn't know what to expect. At first, it seemed simple enough. I went online, I looked up hotel meeting rooms, and there they were. Dozens of options waiting to be picked. What surprised me was that most of them were costing as little as $200 per day, and then you had to add the taxes. I was astounded. I was truly astounded because these were hotels in prime areas. Some of them were within walking distance of downtown areas, even the White House. But hey, I wasn't going to complain. I now had a pick of hotels, and at just $200 per day per meeting room, I was going to do a lot of cherry picking. So I did what any sensible person would do. I emailed half a dozen hotels and asked them if they would be willing to book a meeting room for the dates we decided. And when that job was done, I moved along, making sure I had the sales pages ready because we needed to get participants to sign up. And that was no problem. Over 50% of the seats got taken in just a few days. This was looking better than I thought until I checked my email. The inbox was swamped with responses to my queries for the meeting room. But the common question I was getting was, how many rooms can we block for your guests? And I figured that 35 people were going to show up, so I told them we'd have at least 15 to 20 rooms taken up by the guests. But I couldn't be sure. After all, the guest may choose to stay at the hotel or elsewhere. So I asked them to block a temporary 15 to 20 rooms, and as we signed up the participants, we'd direct them to the hotel, and of course they could sign up. And there would be a cutoff date, so the hotel wouldn't have to keep the rooms booked forever. But the hotels didn't want to play ball. They wanted us to guarantee the rooms and guarantee 80% of the rooms at the very least. So if you consider 35 participants, then 80% is about 28 rooms. Consider that every guest stays 3 nights. That's about 84 bookings. Each room costs about $100 to $200. There's a lot of calculations happening here, but you get the idea, don't you? The hotel was asking us to guarantee between $8,500 to $17,000 worth of bookings. And if the guests didn't show up, we'd have to foot the bill. So I changed the question. I asked, if I don't guarantee the rooms, what will you charge for the meeting rooms? And I got a very precise answer. $6,016. That's $6,016 per day per meeting room. So now we were in a real soup. Most of the participants who'd signed up were told that we'd have the workshop in Washington, D.C. and Vancouver, Canada, but we still didn't have the details of where to put them. Where were we going to have this workshop? Now we had to find the hotels in a big hurry. I don't know how many hotel forms I filled up, but I hated every one of them. It was the same boring set of questions over and over again. So Renuka and I were cutting and pasting endlessly. And then the responses started coming in by the truckload. Every time we check our email, there was a whole bunch of emails with counter questions. How many rooms will you book? Will there be catering involved? What is the minimum catering you'd require? The answer was none, no, and nothing. After all, we just wanted the meeting room, but hotels don't tend to just give you the meeting room. They want all this catering stuff, all the rooms booked, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And now we had people who had booked for the workshop and no hotel room. All of this back and forth was taking hours in a day. I was feeling like a zombie dealing with what seemed like these questions that kept coming at me. And that wasn't the only problem. The other problem was there were so many hotels, some with similar brand names, that in my brain they all started merging and I couldn't tell one from the other. It was at this point that 3 saviors stepped right up. In Vancouver, Leanne asked if she could help. In Washington, D.C., Marina and Natalia volunteered as well. By this point, we were exhausted, but we'd managed to get a few hotels to agree to our terms. And yes, they would do the temporary booking. And no, there wasn't any need of any fancy catering, and no, we could not guarantee the rooms, and some of the hotels agreed. So now it was a matter of creating a short list. And for that, we had to use an Excel spreadsheet. You can tell how desperate I was because I actually participated in updating an Excel spreadsheet. I don't like Excel. I've never liked Excel. Excel and me aren't the best of friends. We hardly know each other. In all my years on a computer, and I've been on computers since the early 1990s, I've never so much as opened up Excel, let alone do a spreadsheet. But as I said, I was desperate. Someone, and I forget who, created a Google Doc spreadsheet, and we started to fill in whatever details were available. And then things started to look a little better. The sign-ups had slowed down considerably since the early burst, but to be fair, we'd only sent out 2 emails. And now that the hotels were falling in place, we could have the luxury of filling in the rest of the seats. Finally, things were starting to settle down a bit. We had hotels in pretty good areas in Georgetown and Washington, D.C., and in downtown Vancouver. At that point in time, Marina and Natalia volunteered to look up the hotels. Now, Marina lives in Virginia, and she said, okay, I'll go and look up some of the hotels. And then Natalia was in Washington, D.C. with her husband and kids. So she jumped on the metro and very magnanimously checked out the hotels that we had shortlisted. And she came back with an F on the hotels. She wasn't impressed. The one that we had set our hearts on was in a basement. It was very squeezed and it had a distinct odor of mildew. But Natalia wasn't giving up. Right at the start, she'd hinted about a hotel called Hampton Inn, which was located near the Reagan National Airport. Now she set about checking it out as an alternative. And yes, the shoe fit. She approved of the meeting rooms and the hotel accommodation. But this close miss had set our hearts racing. What if we made the same mistake in Vancouver? What if the Vancouver hotels turned out to be problematic as well? And that's where Leanne stood up and she said, I'll do it. I'll go and check out the hotels. Now remember that Natalia and Marina and Leanne, these are all clients. They don't work for us, and that's what our clients do. We help them, they help us. I know it sounds odd, it's weird, but that's what we do. Anyway, Leanne drives from Whistler, which is a fair distance away from downtown Vancouver. She takes our short list of hotels that we considered, and then she comes back. They were dumps. This is why it was so easy to find these hotels. They weren't so good to begin with. But just like Natalia's story, there was a happy ending. The Listel on Robson Street, Vancouver, was quite happy with our crazy terms, and they were willing to make a booking for these meeting rooms. So the Excel spreadsheet was down to 2 choices, one in DC or just outside DC and the other one in Vancouver. But it's not like the email stopped. You see, we had contacted maybe 40 to 50 hotels, sometimes twice over. And they were all writing in to ask us to confirm. We even had some of them call long distance. For a change, it was nice to say no. And yes, our trip was finally getting on our way. And not a moment too soon, because participants had to fly in, and some from tiny airports, so they needed to know quickly which airport to fly into. By this point, we knew the answers. Luckily, from that moment on, nothing much went wrong, but that week or 2 was pure misery. I'd go to bed completely drained and very frustrated. To have these rooms booked, to have the event underway was such a relief. And all I had to do was to make sure that the rest of the seats were filled. And I soon got down to the business of making sure that we got the blog rolling and the slides and then the music for the event. And then I started getting all ramped up. But I forgot to tell you what the workshops were about. The workshops were about the brain audit. So I just had to create slides, but I didn't have to create notes because the brain audit book has been around forever and it was as good a notebook as you could expect. But that also got me apprehensive because a lot of the participants had been with Psychotactics and our membership site 5000 BC for a long time. Some of them had read the brain audit in version 1, version 2, and also in version 3. And they were members of 5000 BC. So they had been on our courses, and on the courses I talked about the brain audit. And I was afraid that I would be super boring for these participants. I mean, we'd just gone over all of this stuff in our books, in the audio and the video. How could I meet up with their expectations? How could they sit there and listen to the same thing again? Would it not be boring? And this meant that I wasn't able to sleep. It wasn't because of jet lag. We'd flown in from New Zealand to California. We'd woken up at 4 a.m. and we'd gone straight to Washington, D.C. We were tired. We were crossing lots of time zones. But exhausted as I was, I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to practice my presentation, go over it again and again, and I'd make dozens of changes. Even on the second day, which was kind of a day off because we have a scavenger hunt, or we used to have a scavenger hunt, that was unsettling. I wasn't sure how we'd go about the scavenger hunt. Were we going to play dodgeball? How would people react to having to spend an extra day for no apparent learning? These things bothered me a lot. And it wasn't until day 3 that I truly started to relax, and just a little bit. I wasn't well either. I was very exhausted. I was not sleeping well. And I think all of this ended up with a huge acidity problem. This meant that instead of eating everything in sight, I had to restrict myself to baby food. Anything that was bland, not oily, as I said, baby food. No alcohol, no chocolates, coffee, ice cream. Everything was off the menu. And I wasn't paying attention at first, so I went out. I had some great Ethiopian food, then Mexican, then Italian, and that hit me like a ton of bricks. I was so ill. And I know I'm sounding like a real wuss, but I managed to stiffen my shoulder and neck as well. So why am I telling you all this? Well, to get your sympathy, obviously, but because you need to know that these things happen, that you're not going to get this free ride into everything turning out just hunky-dory. And if you listened to the recording of the workshops, or you were there at the workshop itself, you wouldn't notice any of this. I'm telling you about it right now, but you wouldn't notice any of it. The workshop in DC went really well. We were done, went to bed, we packed, we were ready to catch an 8 a.m. flight to Vancouver, Canada. And it's an international flight, so you have to be at the airport at 5 a.m. or so. And we made sure that we got to bed before 10 p.m. Then at 10:30 p.m., the fire alarm goes off. There's this insistent beeping, and we were so tired and so deep in our sleep that we were racing around the room madly. I tried to call the reception, but the phone was dead. Well, it seemed dead at least. Renuka ran barefoot into the corridor, only to find some completely peaceful folks coming back from dinner. And seeing Renuka barefoot, another woman took off her shoes. No one seemed to be even slightly disturbed. It was like we were the only ones panicking. I was still groggy, still in the room, and I looked at the bags, and they were sitting right under the sprinkler, and I thought, it's a good idea to move these bags before the sprinklers go off and soak all the equipment. And so as I moved the bag, the sound of the fire alarm shifted. It wasn't a fire alarm, there was no fire. Somehow the travel clock had shifted and somehow set an alarm for 10:30 p.m. And we were so tired that it didn't occur to us that it was an alarm. We thought it was a fire alarm. And I know it seems funny to you. It was funny to us as well. We enjoyed the madness for 5 minutes. Then we hopped back to bed and we went off to sleep. By the time we got to Vancouver, my diet was doing really well. The workshops were far more relaxing for me. I smiled a lot more. And then after a few days in Vancouver, we went back to San Jose, California, and went back to New Zealand. The original plan was to have 3 workshops, one in Vancouver, one in Washington, D.C., and one in London. Thank goodness we stopped at 2. I was exhausted. I was ready to see sheep and head back to my Air New Zealand flight back home, and we did. We had a little hiccup at 2. The flight was delayed by 12 hours. I acted like an idiot. I ate spicy Indian food and restarted the acidity, but then it was just part of the game. Workshops are stressful. There's so much to do, so little time. It involves pre-selling, getting venues, making sure everyone is comfortable, getting great content, and running a tight ship in terms of budgets. Things go crazy in workshops, and sometimes not so crazy. And these experiences may intimidate you a bit. Believe me, you should have workshops. They're what help you connect with your audience in a way that no internet browser can do. They help you become a better teacher, a better presenter, a better consultant. And it forges a bond that causes clients to become friends. We went with Marcus Stout for sushi. Stu Walton spent close to 6 hours to just come and say hello, join us for dinner. Greg Lee brought his daughter, Arabia, his wife, Penelope, to meet us for dinner. Marina took us to lunch, showed us around, hosted another lunch for several of us. Stephen Washer helped us with the video shooting, the production, the editing. Tom Clifford helped us by being the perfect interrogator. Karen and Warren made sure that I ate sensibly at the workshop. The list goes on. And these are just folks I'm mentioning from the DC workshop. Everyone plays a massive role, more than you can imagine. This isn't some passive show up and learn workshop. Everyone gets goodies from their hometown. Everyone takes pictures. They have long chats, dinners. It's like Christmas Day or Thanksgiving without all the tension. It's magical, often very emotional. And yes, it's a moment in time that you cannot recreate by just being a speaker at some event. You have to wade in, and it's not always pretty, but it's always exciting and memorable. And so far, it's always had a happy ending, no matter where it started and how it went crazy. These are events that you cannot recreate sitting at your desk in the comfort of your office. You have to be a little brave, a little scared, a lot hassled. And you'll find rich rewards in hosting workshops. So there you have it, a little glimpse into the episodes of our workshop. And we'll do some more in the future. That's it from me, Sean D'Souza, in the Brain Audit and the 3-month vacation mode. And while you're listening to it, I'm probably going to be somewhere in Singapore, eating away, making up for all the time that I couldn't eat because of that baby food and that acidity. Bye for now.